All right, Luke chapter 18, starting at verse 1. He told them a parable to the effect that they ought always to pray and not to lose heart. And as we go through this story, we can see very quickly what Jesus was getting at. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man, and there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, "Give me justice against my adversary." For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, "Though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice so that she will not beat me down by her continual coming." And the Lord said, "Hear what the unrighteous judge says. Will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night?" And so Jesus' exhortation to us is that we are always to pray and never give up. And we can give up quite easily in this culture of ours where we demand instant gratification. We become very impatient. We don't know how to wait and endure. And Jesus is saying we need to learn how to endure and never stop praying for the needs, for the cares that weigh heavy on our heart. I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily. Verse 8, it doesn't always feel speedily. But we said Jesus is expressing Father's heart to answer your prayers as soon as possible. And you've got to accept that and believe it. Father will answer my prayers as soon as possible. Waiting is hard. It's one of the hardest things we do as Christians. And sometimes we don't understand why we have to wait. And that's why we're going through this. We're going through, I think, 5 points of why we should never give up in prayer, but continue to come to God and make our petitions known. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? If the Son of Man was to come tonight, will he find faith in your heart? If he was to come right now, will he find you praying, seeking him, abiding in him, drawing on his life flow? We see here in Hebrews chapter 10 where the author admonishes us, do not throw away your confidence. It has a great reward if we are patient in seeking Father. You have need of endurance so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. I don't think there's any greater character trait in prayer than that character of being persistent and fervent and yet at the same time content. I'm going to pray fervently. I'm going to pray persistently. I'm not going to give up. God's going to hear my voice day and night. And simultaneously, I am content with Father's will. Not now. I'll wait. I'll wait for the will of God to be accomplished. And so, striking that balance of persistence and contentedness is rather hard at times, isn't it? My righteous one shall live by faith, Hebrews 10:38. Shall live by faith. That word live, if you look it up, it means to regulate one's life, to regulate one's steps, to regulate one's lifestyle. And so we are to live by faith. We're not to live by sight. We're not to live by what we see. We don't live by the circumstances, good or bad. We don't live by prosperity. We don't live by poverty. But we live by the promises of God. And if he shrinks back, he says, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed. And so he's giving us a warning. If we shrink back from the promises of God, if we shrink back from seeking him, pursuing him with all of our heart, if we shrink back from giving him our petitions day and night, we will be destroyed. But we have faith. And those that have faith and don't shrink back, not only is God pleased with them, but it says here that they preserve their souls. And so we never give up in prayer. Never lose heart. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 41 is a great story of persistence in prayer. 1 Kings 18, verse 41, and Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of the rushing of rain." Remember, this was after the drought for years. So Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. And he bowed himself down on the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." And he went up and looked and said, "No, there's nothing, not a cloud in the sky." And he said to his servant, "Go again." How many times? 7 times. And so 7 times he sent his servant back. And he kept praying. Persistent, enduring, never giving up. And at the 7th time he said, "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea." And he said, "Go up and say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you. There's going to be a huge storm coming, a lot of rain, flooding, and in a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain." 5 reasons to never give up. We're just going to go through, number 3 tonight, but let's review 1 and 2. First of all, we never give up in prayer because God is working even when we don't see any natural indication that He's working. And never forget that story of Elisha and his servant, 2 Kings chapter 6, where they woke up that one morning and horses and chariots were all around the city. They were surrounded. No way to escape. And his servant said, "My master, what shall we do?" And Elisha responds and says, "Don't be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And so Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So just because you don't see things changing, just because you don't see things happening, never, ever means that God is not at work. He is at work. Believe it. Trust it. Number 2, there's nothing impossible with God. It's kind of hard to believe this, but as Christians, sometimes we think, the situation is just past all hope. There's no way this can change or be reversed. You ever feel like that? The circumstances, the situation is just too overwhelming. We're doomed. And remember, God does the impossible. Here in Luke chapter 1, verse 35, the power of the Holy Spirit coming upon Mary, a virgin. It's impossible for a virgin to give birth to a child. And then not only that, he says in Luke 1:36, your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son. And this is the 6th month with her who was called what? Barren. Even when she was of childbearing age, she couldn't have children. And now she's old and she's conceived. God really does work by miracles, doesn't He? He works by the supernatural. In verse 37, it says, "For nothing will be impossible with God." So number 1, don't give up in prayer just because you don't see anything happening. There's a whole bunch happening. Number 2, don't give up in prayer because it just seems impossible, beyond all hope, because nothing's impossible with God. He does great and mighty things. Remember last week we saw Acts chapter 12 where Peter's in prison, no way of escaping, chained to 2 soldiers with 2 more soldiers guarding the gate. What a miracle of the shackles falling off his arms, him walking out, and it says the gate just opened on its own. Where the 2 sentries were that were supposed to be guarding it, what they were doing, who knows? But Peter just walks out miraculously. Nothing's impossible. Never give up hope. Never give up praying. God can do things that are impossible in the natural. And then number 3 for tonight. God does not work according to our expectations or our plans. And I want you to think about these 3 phrases here. His ways and methods are, number 1, incomprehensible. We don't understand everything he's doing. We don't know how he's going to do it. His ways and his methods are incomprehensible. They are never predictable. And many times his ways seem just downright contradictory. And let me show you what I mean by this. Isaiah 55 verse 8. He says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So his ways are so much higher. And as we're looking through such a peephole of our humanity, we can't think the way God thinks. We can't even comprehend how and what he is up to and how he's moving in our midst. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes out of my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and it shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. So he's saying his word will always produce life and power and fruit, and it will produce after its own kind. But the way it does it at times is beyond our comprehension. Have you ever looked back at what God has done in your life and thought, man, I would have never thought of doing it that way? And God's ways are limitless, that we can't think of and don't realize and don't understand what's happening. His ways and his methods are unpredictable. Isaiah 43 verse 16, "Thus says the Lord who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters." So what is he talking about? He's talking about crossing through the Red Sea on dry ground. "Who brings forth chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down and they cannot rise. They are extinguished, quenched like a wick." So that's when the Red Sea came back over top of Pharaoh's army and they were all destroyed, right? But then he says in verse 18, "Remember not the former things, nor consider the things of old." And what he's saying is, just because I opened up the Red Sea the last time doesn't mean I'm going to do it that way again. So don't put me into a box. Leave the miracle business where it belongs with our God. And don't think that you know best, or don't think that you know how God is going to do something in your life. Don't think that you know how God is going to answer your prayer. Because more than likely, you'll be quite surprised and wake up one day and think, God answered my prayer. It's a miracle, but I didn't expect him to do it this way. And so that's why we never give up in prayer. "Behold, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? Yes, I gave you such a great salvation and deliverance as you passed through the Red Sea, but I'm going to do a new thing now. I'm going to do it differently this time. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The wild beasts will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, for I give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people." God does some of the most unlikely things at times. Things that don't make any sense to us. If you were thirsty and had to find water, how many of you would go to the desert? Desert is the last place you'd go, right? But that's the way God works. Very often, he works in ways that we can't comprehend, that are completely unpredictable. His ways and methods can seem, what? Contradictory. Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. For that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside. That was nice and respectful of Peter to, not chasten the Lord publicly. And began to rebuke him, saying, Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you. And we know what Peter and the rest of the disciples were thinking. Jesus had been talking about the kingdom of heaven, and he came in to usher this kingdom, and he was the king of this kingdom. And so in Peter's mind, he had to be thinking something like, Lord, you can't have a kingdom if the king dies, and you can't defeat Rome if the king dies. And Lord, you don't understand. This is not any way to start a kingdom. What are you doing, Lord? And so he turns and he says to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. You're thinking like a man, Peter. Don't you know that my ways are incomprehensible? My ways are unpredictable. My ways seem contradictory many times. But look what a kingdom God gave birth to through the death and the resurrection of Jesus. John chapter 11, verse 5, just moving quickly through the story. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Now, immediately you would think, why, Jesus, right? I mean, if you really love someone, are you going to stay away 2 days longer when they're sick? Jesus, we don't understand what you're thinking. We don't understand what you're doing. If you look at your life right now and the circumstances of your life, and you're saying, I don't understand, Lord, what is going on? If your life is turned upside down and you've been praying and seeking God, but it seems like the exact opposite of what you're praying is what is occurring, you're probably right in the will of God. Watch what he goes on and says. He says, Then after this, he said to the disciples, Let us go to Judea again. And the disciples said to him, Lord, the Jews were just seeking to stone you. You're going back there again? Nothing's making sense to the disciples, is it? And Jesus said, Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if everyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After these things, he said, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Jesus was speaking of his death, but they thought he meant Lazarus was napping, taking a nice nap. Can you see what the disciples are thinking? Well, Lord, what are you doing? You can't be king of a kingdom if you're going to die, Jesus. And we thought you loved Lazarus. Why are you staying here 2 extra days? Why are you going through Judea? They were just trying to kill you there. This is not making any sense, Lord. And then you talk about Lazarus as if he's asleep. He's dead, Jesus. Do you not know? Does that feel like your life at times? Lord, what are you doing? Why don't you answer my prayer? I don't understand what's happening in my life, Lord. And if just the exact opposite of what you've been praying starts to happen, I can't think along these lines without thinking of Joseph. Joseph had these dreams, right? That he's going to be exalted one day. Now, if you had to sit down and strategize and say, okay, we've got to get Joseph in a position in Egypt where he can save the nation of Israel by saving his family, how would you go about that? Would you think that the best way to get that job done It's to not only make this person a slave, but make this person a criminal in prison. That's not a way to win friends and influence people, is it? Who's going to pay attention to a criminal slave? I mean, if things had taken its natural course, Joseph would have died in prison as a nobody. I mean, you'd want to strategize, you'd want a public relations guy, to meet with the press and to build your image before the people in a certain way, and right? But how is this guy going to become second in command of the strongest nation in the world at that time by being a slave and a criminal in prison? Do you see how God does things in ways that we wouldn't even imagine? And he can do it that way because he's God. You take Moses. Now, we know Moses moved presumptuously and killed the Egyptian, right? And so he gets sent out into the wilderness. And he's there for how long? 40 years, right? That's way too long, Lord. You should have sent him back in 5 years at least, because, 40 years, that's a generation. Moses had a lot of good contacts. He could network really well in Egypt, but after 40 years, that's all out the window, God. He doesn't have any contacts now. And when you're leading around a bunch of sheep and talking to sheep all day, you kind of lose your vocabulary and the eloquence of speaking. And so Moses' speech was kind of rough and rusty by this point. And Lord, it would have been so much better if he came back sooner. He would have had friends on the inside to help his cause. But God, to send him back 40 years later, it's just too late now, God. Isn't it amazing how God works sometimes? He will usually work in the exact opposite of what we think. And if your life is turned upside down right now, and it looks like things are going in the opposite direction that they should be going, you're probably right on the brink of a miracle, because that's how God works. And so Jesus, you know the story. He goes, and I've always loved this saying of Thomas, "Let us also go that we may die with him." Now, we don't know if that's tongue-in-cheek, if he's being sarcastic, or if it's a sign of great loyalty. We don't know the nuances of what was being said at the moment, but they really expected to die. And so he gets there, and Martha comes out and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And then Mary goes to see him, and what do you think she says? "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Lord, this isn't the way you do things, Lord. Right? And so why do we never give up in prayer? Number 3, God does not work according to our expectations and plans. And even when you pray for something and he answers that prayer, many times he does not do it in the way that you expected. So don't be presumptuous to think that you know the mind of God. And just because you don't see things evolving the way you think they should play out, don't give up in prayer. He's going to come up with a plan much better than yours.